week 6 of the fantasy football season, and his running back sits this week. First starts David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. So David Montgomery, he's taken the backfield by storm over there in Detroit the last 2 ball games with 20 or more fantasy points in back-to-back weeks. And this week here, not the greatest of matchups with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, where they got a pretty stout defense versus the run. But right now, he's getting a big workload. The Lions giving him all the opportunities pretty much over Jahmyr Gibbs, where Gibbs has been just a little bit of a change of pace back and a third down back. And after the last week's performance, where Gibbs didn't play and Montgomery had a big ball game once again, he's definitely a start this week. Next start, Isaiah Pacheco of the Kansas City Chiefs. So Pacheco's been pretty decent so far this year. And Thursday Night Football, a great matchup for Pacheco versus the Denver Broncos. That can't stop anyone. We just saw the Jets carve him up on the ground for 200 yards in that game, where this Jet offensive line isn't even that good. So right now this week, Pacheco, a great matchup, and he's definitely a running back I would start. Next start's Tony Pollard of the Dallas Cowboys. So Tony Pollard, he's had a few good weeks to start the season, but the last few weeks, the numbers have gone down every week since week 1 in fantasy points-wise. But this week here, I think it's going to be a close game. Most of Dallas's games have blowouts one way or the other, but this week with them at the Los Angeles Chargers on Monday Night Football, I think this Cowboy team and the Chargers are going to put up a decent amount of points going both ways. And Tony Pollard, they need to get him going as this Cowboy team, because they've had a lot of problems this season in the red zone scoring. And just in general, last week versus the Niners, nothing was going on, only scoring 10 points. So this week in a bounce-back game versus a pretty weak defense for the most part. He's a start this week. Next start, DeAndre Swift of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Swift, it was a great deal and pretty much a steal, in my opinion, for this Philadelphia Eagle team to make the deal with the Detroit Lions and get Swift for a 4th-round draft pick. So right now, I know on paper it's a tough matchup at a pretty stout New York Jet defense, but we just saw Samaje Perine and Jaleel McLaughlin both have solid ball games as a two-headed backfield over there for the Denver Broncos versus the Jets. So this week, I think Swift's going to have another good game. He's pretty much obviously a starter each and every week for fantasy owners. Swift, I think, has a good game, even with a tough matchup. And this Philly team, they pretty much have been running all year on opposing defenses, no matter the matchup. Number 6, James Cook, the Buffalo Bills. So James Cook, I know he didn't have a great game last week in Week 5 versus the Jacksonville Jaguars in London, but this week a good matchup versus the New York Giants. We just saw Akane go off for a monster game, over 150 yards rushing, and even Raheem Mostert had a solid game with 15 PPR fantasy points. So this week, I think Cook gets back on track. We know Buffalo, they were trailing a majority of the game versus Jacksonville and had to throw the football pretty much the rest of the game in the second half. And this week, I think Buffalo, they'll have a lead early and often versus Giant defense. And James Cook, he'll put up solid numbers this week. Next start, Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders. So Brian Robinson, he's been pretty solid this season. And it seems like each and every week, at least 12 or more fantasy points for Robinson. So this week on paper, I know it's a tough matchup with the Atlanta Falcons. They're one of the best teams in the league against the run. We just saw them shut down Dameon Pierce in this Houston Texan run game. But right now, Robinson's a physical back, running between the tackles. And obviously, he's taking all the big snaps in the backfield over there from Antonio Gibson, where he's pretty much a change of pace and passing downs back. So right now, Robinson, one of the better backs this season in fantasy football. And once again, even in the tough matchup on paper going to Atlanta, I have him as a start this week. And I'll start Alexander Mattison of the Minnesota Vikings. I know Madison, he's been up and down this season. A couple decent games and a couple poor games where he didn't do anything. But this week, a great matchup at the Chicago Bears, where you can run out this Bear team the whole time. And we saw Robinson, who I mentioned earlier, have 13 fantasy points. And even Antonio Gibson, 4 catches, 64 yards in that game. So Madison, I know Cam Akers is over there. He's getting some work in the backfield. But this Bear team gives up a lot of yards on the ground. And I think this week here, this Viking team, they might want to slow it down a little bit and run the football, especially if Justin Jefferson might miss time. So I like Madison as a number 2 running back for fantasy owners. And to start this week now to the sits, Dameon Pierce of the Houston Texans. So pretty much he's been a touchdown-dependent running back, unfortunately, this season. Here's Dameon Pierce. And this week in a tough matchup versus stout New Orleans Saints defense that shut down Ezekiel Elliott and Ramondre Stevenson in Week 5. I don't see much here for Dameon Pierce. Once again, if you don't get a touchdown, his ceiling's pretty much been 7 or 8 fantasy points. So with a tough matchup, and this team being pretty much a pass-first team for the most part, with at least 35-plus attempts per game, it seems like, for C.J. Stroud. I have Pierce as a sit, and he's not doing much out of the backfield as well, catching the football. Next sit's Jahmyr Gibbs of the Detroit Lions. So David Montgomery's really taken the backfield, like I said, over there for this Lion team over the last 2 weeks with 3 touchdowns and over 100 yards in Week 4's game versus the Green Bay Packers. And then Week 5, another solid game he had in that one, obviously, where they steamrolled the Carolina Panthers. So this week here, Gibbs, even if he's back in a tougher matchup with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, I just can't trust him. So far, his best game's been 12 fantasy points in PPR leagues this season, but pretty much 7 to 9 points he's been getting, Gibbs. So now with all those factors, he's an easy sit for me. The next sit, Jerome Ford of the Cleveland Browns. So this Brown team, they've gone to more of a pass-first team since Nick Chubb has been out, even though Jerome Ford's put up points the last few weeks here. But this week, a very tough matchup versus San Francisco. We saw them shut down the Dallas Cowboy run game, and we even saw them, for the most part, shut down James Conner a majority of that game in Week 4. So this week here, I think they're going to be down early and often is this Cleveland Brown team, and they're going to have no choice but to throw the football all over the yard. And I know Jerome Ford's a decent receiver out of the backfield, but obviously Kareem Hunt is getting some work as well. So right now, tough matchup. Kareem Hunt in the mix. I think that we'll see Hunt get some more work after the bye week here as well. And I got Ford as a sit. Next sit, Gus Edwards of the Baltimore Ravens. So in general, that backfield is just a mess over there for this Raven team. Gus Edwards, we know, don't catch the ball out of the backfield really. Justice Hill has looked like the better back, and Keon Mitchell might even come off injured reserve and play in this Week 6 game. So with all those factors, and Tennessee being one of the best teams in the league against the run, where you could pass on Tennessee all day, but obviously can't stop in the run, even though Tennessee just got torched in that game by Zach Moss, where he went over 160 yards with 2 touchdowns in that one. I just don't see Gus Edwards having a good game. And Tennessee, if you want to attack him, is through the air. And obviously, if this Raven team's going to run a lot, it's going to be through Lamar Jackson. So I got Edwards as a sit this week. Next sit is Zach Moss, who I just mentioned. After going off last week, I think we're going to see Jonathan Taylor ease back in once again with more workload in this game. I know Morris had a big workload once again, had another monster performance, but you're not going to sign Jonathan Taylor, 3-year, $42 million contract extension for him to sit on the bench. So right now, it's been great what Zach Moss has done 3 out of the first 5 games. But now with Gardner Minshew in there at quarterback, teams are going to stack the box even more. And with Jonathan Taylor's workload, I think he's going to get 20 touches in this ball game at Jacksonville. Like I said, you're paying him money, and he's not going to sit on the bench. So this week, I think you could fade away from Morris and sit him. Next sit, Javonte Williams of the Denver Broncos. So right now, to be honest, Samaje Perine and Jaleel McLaughlin in the early going have looked like the better running backs over there in Denver over at Javonte Williams. And I know Williams, he missed last week's ball game versus the New York Jets. But like I said, McLaughlin and Perine were a solid 1-2 combo in a losing effort versus the New York Jet team. So right now, tough matchup versus the Chiefs in terms of they're going to be down early and often in this one, obviously, is this Denver Bronco team. And they're going to have to play catch-up. And we know Javonte Williams really isn't a great receiver out of the backfield, and he's not 100% with this hip injury and even coming off of off-season knee surgery. So right now, with all those factors, and I think McLaughlin and Perine have more impact in that backfield. I got Williams as a sit this week, even if he played. The final sit's Rachaad White of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So it's going to be a tough game here for Tampa Bay, I believe, to run the football. Detroit's been one of the better run defenses in all the league so far this season. And right now, this is a pass-first offense with Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and they really haven't run the football well. I know Rachaad White's a good receiver out of the backfield, catching 50 passes last season in his rookie year. But this week here versus the Detroit Lions, I don't see White having a great game. I'm not saying he's going to have a horrible game, but in terms of going out there and putting up a monster 15, 20-point game, I don't see it from Rachaad White. So right now, he's a low-end 2 running back this week versus a good Lion defense. And a ball game where I think it's going to be a shootout, and they might have to abandon the run here is Tampa Bay. I have him as a sit, so that's running back start sit for Week 6 of the fantasy football season.